Homage to the Triple Gem. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe, and I'm just homage to the Triple Gem. So today here it's raining quite a bit in the background. This is a kind of, I think, like a second rainy season in the area of Sri Lanka where I'm staying, and usually the big one, I think, comes just after like October, November, something like this, and then there's some areas there's a second one. Most areas, I think, there's a second one in March, April, something like this. And so, depending on the season, depending on the area, a person has to adjust the way that they live to live there comfortably. Kind of these rainy days, rainy seasons. A person has to conduct themselves. You have to conduct yourself differently than you would during the dry season. You kind of go around with an umbrella maybe, or some monks have these kind of like very big palm leaves that they use as umbrellas here. That's the traditional way. And even the shoes you wear sometimes have to be different. I remember when I first came to Sri Lanka, I had these kind of like sport sandals that were, I can't remember what they call them. They kind of, the strap doesn't go between the toes, it goes all the way over. And in North America, you would have sandals like this, and they have kind of like polyester material, like a little bit fuzzy material in them. And that, in the rainy season, that really is not an asset. It kind of starts to get a bit funky. So the footwear that you use in really wet climates needs to change too. It's much easier to go around in these climates with like just a straight normal flip-flop. And if those flip-flops break when you're in the forest, you can fix them too. So in a very hot climate, then the way that a person conducts themselves is different as well. Like even the way that you build a hut, like build a kuti, would be different. So right now I'm looking at building a kind of a hut, a kuti, in a forest here that it's kind of, we'll see how it goes. It's really a roll of the dice with the authorities. So slim chances, but always worth trying out. But when you're looking to design a hut, you take into account the features of the landscape in which you're planning to design it. So where are you going to position the windows? Where's the wind blowing that has the freshest air? In this kind of particular area, there's this waterfall. It's a beautiful area, and so if you position the hut in the right way, choose the right place, then when the wind blows, it blows this like fresh. Misty, like very fresh air coming from the waterfall. It's kind of quite refreshing. And if you choose the right point on the mountain, then also wind blows over the mountain, like coming from a different direction, but not coming through like a dank portion of the valley, but coming from this very open portion over the mountains, which is also quite fresh. So there's a lot of things that can go into choosing how to design a hut for a particular area, choosing what kind of footwear, how to prepare oneself for particular seasons, for particular places, for particular countries. And to try to go through like a very specific list for every single situation would be almost, it'd be pretty exhausting and tedious. You wouldn't want to know about it. But there are certain principles that you can take into account. If you want less moisture in your hut, then you should raise it off the ground. If you want to turn it in a direction that it's receiving good wind, and if it's not in an area that's too cold. If you're in a very hot area, then you want the roof to be high and there to be a separation sometimes between the building where you're going to be staying and the roof. There's like you can put the roof on these 4 pillars. And have a big gap between the building where you're staying and the roof itself. So in a similar way, it can be very tempting when people come to meditation to look for a very simplistic, like intellectual explanation that they can just apply to everything. And somehow that will give them some kind of guidance, some kind of like a framework that they can use in every situation to determine whether they're meditating well or not. So these frameworks change a lot over time. In the past, there was this intellectual framework. I think probably before, maybe you could say like in the 50s or something like this in Sri Lanka, other places. And in the West, even coming up to maybe like the 90s, something like this, there was this intellectual framework that jhanas or absorption type concentration was something that was like a distraction from the path. It would lead a person to become a Brahma. And not much point to it. The straight path was kind of just dry insight, just the satipatthanas. And so people would have this kind of intellectual framework about what it is that they have to do to meditate, and they use that to kind of sift, to apply to every situation. The jhanas are bad. I'm just going to go straight, just going straight for the the vipassana. And any kind of concentration is something that's just a distraction. Now there can be somewhat of a shift where it's like you have to have the jhanas in order to do anything in your meditation. And neither of those positions are necessarily accurate. The fact of the mind is that it's a very complicated thing. And when we try to use our intellect inappropriately to create some kind of simplistic framework that you can just apply to every situation with your meditation, we actually do a disservice to our attempts to train the mind and to gain greater and greater peace and ease and greater freedom from suffering. One of the things with the mind, it has these different environments to it. It can be a bit like the weather. These kind of different moods come through the mind, different inclinations come through the mind, and the way that one approaches, the way that one responds to those situations, the way that one lives in the mind, given its environment, is different. It can't be the same all the time. And just like now, this rain, it looked like it was coming through, it was threatening. Tomorrow, the way it is in the area I am in Sri Lanka, is that tomorrow it could be really sunny, really hot. And, in a few hours, basically all indication that there was any rain at all just disappear. So what one wants to do is one wants to use the intellect appropriately to come up with some principles in terms of meditation. One of the important ones is that the Buddha has given different topics that counter certain defilements. And so if a particular defilement arises in the mind, then one can try to use that topic to counter it. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's always just going to be one way to do a particular meditation, to just practice, say, metta in one way, and just practicing that way should work every time. I mean, if we're caught in a huge downpour and you've got a kind of particular umbrella, it's getting blown all over the place, well, you might need something different. Actually, they have these sheets. They're kind of like a reflective tarp, and they weigh about 100 grams. And you can be in a pretty intense rainstorm and just take one of those things, put it over top of you, and you'll be shielded from the rain, and it also reflects body heat so you can stay warm. So if you have this really intense rainstorm and your umbrella is not blocking the rain, then you might want to take out one of these reflective tarps and to have one of them on hand. I mean, you don't want to walk around with these reflective tarps all the time. They're awkward and they're large compared to an umbrella. But if the situation warrants it, that's the time to pull that tarp out. So if one is practicing metta in a particular way, asubha in a particular way, breath meditation in a particular way, and it doesn't work, it's a sign that one needs to change it. Another thing that can be kind of dangerous about these simplistic intellectual frameworks is that people use them to evaluate where they are and where other people are on their path to nibbana, which is really a bit of a dangerous thing. So if it's just the case that you only need to do vipassana and there's these certain stages, what stage of vipassana are you at? Or if it's just the case that the jhanas are the most important thing, if you don't have them, you can't really do anything. It was like, what jhana does this guy have? Is he at a number 1 and the other person's at a number 4? Then that person who's at a number 4 must be much further along the path than the person who's at a number 1. But it doesn't really work that way. So one of the important things to know about the purpose for which we practice meditation in Buddhism is that it's meant to lead towards dispassion. And this is something for people that ripens, like the watering of a plant. It ripens in there's certain principles you can control, but there's some things that you can't control. And so all of these things eventually are tools to lead to dispassion, which can lead to release. So it's not necessarily the case that you're going to be able to say that, say, the guy who's practicing Vipassana has had X or Y or Z experience, and the other person who's practicing jhanas and has had third jhana or fourth jhana, and this person hasn't had any jhanas. It's not necessarily the case. You can say that one person is further along their path than others. I mean, you can say that the one person is more developed in samadhi, or the other person's more developed in insight in whatever particular way, but that is not necessarily an indication of where they are on their path to Nibbana. Now, there's this story that I was reading from the early Ajahns in the Thai forest tradition, and there's one Ajahn who was very good at samadhi, and he developed psychic powers, and could read other monks' minds. And one day he heard this group of women walking by, and his mind was just totally invaded by lust, and he ended up disrobing. So it's not necessarily the case that you can say that because a person has all these abilities, they're necessarily further along than another person. Actually, as a monk, you sometimes see this. I mean, if you go to school or whatever as somebody in the West, and you get these marks. You got an A plus, whatever. You're an A in this and B in that and A and C or whatever in these various topics. And you've got some people, they're getting straight A's in all the topics. And you figure this guy's going to have, this guy or girl, this person will have a really bright future. They're going to be excellent at their career. And sometimes that is the case. But other times, unexpectedly, some of the really, really wealthy people were not like the most academically proficient. Sometimes they're really like B students. I have one friend, I guess you'd call him my most successful friend. He was like a B student our whole time in elementary school. And there were people in our elementary school who were getting all these straight A's and everything. He's the most successful of my friends. He has a PhD now and other things, successful in worldly terms. From friends who I grew up with. So it's not always the case that it's so easy to tell that because this person has had this experience or that experience, that means they're going to be further along the path. And it's not useful to judge our path based on the framework that another person creates. So that's one of the real dangers, is that people can sometimes hear about how one person has practiced and then think that their practice should go in that exact same direction. So sometimes people, based on their own practice, based on their own experiences, the experiences that a person can have in Buddhism can be very, very powerful, like life-changing experiences. And so if a person has that experience, one of the dangers that can happen is if, based on that experience, they say that everybody should have this X, Y, and Z happen to them, because that's what happened to, speaking from this person's perspective, hypothetically, that's what happened to me. And that is not really the way that it works all the time. There's this sutta called the Kim Sukha Sutta, in which the Buddha describes how various monks were conducting their minds when their minds were well purified. And one monk is focusing on whatever subject to origination is subject to cessation. Another monk was focusing on the 6 sense bases, and it goes on. There's a bunch of different ones. And the monk who asked these various monks this question is confused, so he goes to the Buddha and speaks to him. And the Buddha compares it to a Kim Sukha tree. They call it a riddle tree. So sometimes this tree in one season has a particular way of looking. It has, I think, very bright like leaves, almost like a fiery appearance. Another season it's like totally bare. Another season it looks different. So it's all the same tree. So the Buddha then gives this simile of 2 swift messengers who come through a gate. Sometimes they might come through the northern gate or the southern gate or the eastern gate or the western gate, and they deliver a message to the commander of the fortress. So, just paraphrasing here as far as I remember that sutta. And so, in a similar way, the way that people will approach the path to Nibbana can be like going through these different gates in the city. I mean, it's all the same city, but there are different gates. There's different approaches that one can take. And the message, the accurate report that gets delivered, in this case to the commander is the chitta, then that accurate report is the same for all of them. It's an accurate report of unbinding. But the particular experiences that they have coming to the city, even the gate that they're looking at may look different. It may not look the same as the northern, southern, eastern, western gates may all look different. So it's not really useful to take another person's experiences and steps and assume that one will have to have those same experiences. and then build up a simplistic intellectual framework where one is at a particular level, the other people one sees practicing around one are at a particular level based on these experiences that have been formalized or codified based on what may be true, real, and accurate experiences, but for another person. So one of the emphases of the Thai forest tradition that I really liked when I first started reading about it was that it's kind of a very individual path, and that was recognized. So there's this story that I think is relatively well known in the Thai tradition, somewhat well known, one could say, where there's a monk and he goes to approach Longta Mahabua, who was one of the most famous monks in Thailand. And he goes to stay with him and he asks, how should I attain Nibbana? And basically expecting Longta Mahabua to give him this very systematic answer. First you do this, then you do that. And then Longta Mahabua said to him, he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know what will work for you. He said, Longta Mahabua said, I know what worked for me. He said, my advice is to keep trying things out, and what works, keep doing that. What doesn't work, stop doing that. So that, in some sense, can seem like a more simplistic intellectual framework, but in the working out of it, it can be much more complex. Like the weather. I mean, we can say that, okay, if it's hot, then, if it's rainy, break out your umbrella. But if it's a downpour, if it's a deluge, the umbrella might not be enough, depending on the situations you're in. You might need this plastic sheet. If you're a monk staying alone in the woods, if you're a person just jetting between two buildings, that are close together, you might not really need even an umbrella at all. You could just, bear the few drops of rain. So, in a similar way, when one comes to practice, one of the important things is that, to look at what it is that is causing one to advance in one's practice. And this is something very, very personal. What is it that makes me go forward? What is it that causes good qualities to increase in my mind? What is it that causes bad qualities to decrease in my mind? It's something very, very personal. What is it that works for me? What is it that doesn't work? So that is the reality of the mind and the way that it needs to be trained. There are certain principles to it. There's things that the Buddha's laid down that are good qualities, that are bad qualities. But there's not really this kind of strict framework, like you should have this experience or this experience. Like you should, somebody who has the third jhana is further ahead than somebody who hasn't had any jhanas and they're practicing vipassana. Or somebody who's practicing vipassana, they're further ahead than somebody who's wasting their time practicing the jhanas. The focus in every aspect of a person's practice needs to be the elimination of their personal defilements. And that's something that they can know for themselves, which is why it's called openaiko, leading inwards. It's called pachatang veditabo, to be experienced each for themselves, basically to experience individually by the wise. So these things are principles that one can use to apply to one's practice, but in the end it requires this observing of the mind, because the mind has these different environments. The environment in my mind is different than the environment in yours. The environment in your mind is different from the environment in the minds of the other people that you know. And because of this, they require different gear. They require different adaptations. They require the home that one wants to build, the kuti or the hut that one wants to dwell in and practice in, to be specifically tailored for that place. It requires the tools that one used to live there, the umbrellas or whatever it might be, to be tailored for the weather there, and to be prepared to change them when the situation changes, when the environment in the mind changes. Because although it's complicated to practice in this way, if one does practice in that way, it becomes more intuitive. It becomes the way in which one can adapt to these situations requires less thought and can become more comfortable and more automatic, and kind of build these grooves into the mind, that are good, that are wholesome, so that the wholesome aspects of one's mind become more second nature, and the unwholesome ones become more and more alien. Now, this is a path that one wants to tread for one's meditation. So one doesn't necessarily have to be looking at like some framework, like what jhana is a person at, or what vipassana level is one at. One needs to look at the mind to see, is it gaining in wholesome qualities and declining in unwholesome ones, and is it becoming purified? And this is the purpose for which we meditate. This is the purpose for which we keep sila, It's the purpose for which we give dana. We've come to the Buddhist path in order to practice for the ending of suffering.